Why is democracy important for socialism? Let's talk about it. Now, there's a common misconception that democratic socialism and social democracy are the same thing, and there's good reason for that, which is that historically they were often used interchangeably, with some of the most radical Marxist political organizations of the early 1900s being called social democratic parties. But social democrats then took a turn for the conservative, most notably around World War I, when the German Social Democratic Party, known as the SPD, failed to oppose Germany's participation in the war. Since then, social democracy has come to be synonymous with a brand of progressive politics that seeks to reform capitalism or mitigate some of its ails without fundamentally destroying it. So they might promote things like universal childcare, universal health care, and other forms of a social welfare state that leaves capitalism largely intact. Democratic socialists, on the other hand, have a different approach. Democratic socialists imagine a world where workers, or the masses, have democratic control over every aspect of society, whether it's in the workplace, in our political system, or in our social structure. Democratic socialists believe that political democracy alone, like in the United States, doesn't go far enough if all of our economic and social power is being collected by a select few of capitalists at the top. Instead, we want the means of production to be democratically owned and shared among the workers that produce the wealth. Now, sometimes people will hear the word democratic and think electoral democracy, but that's not what I'm talking about here. Democracy here is more of an ideal rather than a particular style of governing. The democratic socialist political system would probably look very different from the democratic political system we have in the United States. And our democratic participation in society would be in a much broader sense, including things like making democratic decisions over what the factories that we collectively own produce and how we distribute them. At its core, socialism is the desire for workers to exert democratic control over their own lives, and this has been tried several times throughout history, including the Paris Commune in 1871, which deeply influenced Marxist politics, the Soviets or workers' councils of the early Soviet Union, and the nationalization of industry under Salvador Allende in Chile, which was led by a bottom-up workers' movement on the ground. But our path to socialism is just as important as our goals for socialism. Some of history's most well-known socialist projects, the USSR, China, Cuba, were overthrowing systems of peasant farming and slavery. Today, in the United States, we are organizing against a well-oiled, developed capitalist machine, which is very different from the semi-feudal societies that many of the most famous socialist revolutions overcame. And so our strategy may look very different from the strategies that they took then. Instead, we'll have to contest power socially, politically, and economically, in the streets through mass mobilization and social movements, in our workplaces through the labor movement, and occasionally at the ballot box. However, this doesn't mean that we are inherently pacifist or nonviolent on principle, and if we learn from the history of projects like Chile, we know that we may eventually have to defend the democratic socialist project by any means necessary, but it's just not where our power initially comes from. Instead, our power comes from our ability to mobilize mass amounts of everyday people to fight for a better world, in the workplace, in the streets, and beyond.